Hey guys, this is Andy. I'm so glad that you can join me again today. I want to talk about fascism because fascism is a thing that everyone's been throwing that word around like it's just a football, just a frisbee, at the park. And a lot of people don't really know what fascism actually means. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about fascism and how it's manifesting itself in America today. So the first thing about fascism and the first thing about any kind of radical movement like fascism or communism is that they all have differences, but they also have a lot of commonality, especially the radical movements. They have more commonality than any of the other sort of more nominal or more moderate political movements. And so we're going to go over those things. The first one is restricting free speech, right? Now, the definition of fascism, if you look at the Merriam-Webster definition, and you could look at all the other ones that you want to, they're all going to say something to the effect of what it says here at the very bottom, forcible suppression of opposition, right? So they're suppressing, they're keeping down, they're holding down the opponent. They're not going to allow you to freely express yourself. Does that make sense? Right? And they're going to justify it in certain ways. Okay. So the Nazis and Mussolini really was, Italian fascism is really where fascism came from Italy. But because everybody knows Hitler, I'm just going to go over Nazi Germany, okay? Nazi Germany was exactly like this. In 1934, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis completely did exactly what we're talking about. They forcibly suppressed their opposition. They controlled the newspapers, they controlled magazines, they controlled books, they controlled culture, right? By movie stars, musicians. They controlled these things. They didn't allow, it was illegal to criticize the Nazi government, right? It eventually became illegal, right? There was a step-by-step process that happened, but this is where they ended up. In America today, censorship in the 20th century, in the 1900s, really wasn't there in America, right? Most people didn't do that. However, in 21st century America, you see that happening, but it's not happening with the right. It's actually happening with the left. The American left today are censoring all the conservative voices, right? They're taking videos down, they're flagging it, saying that this is false information, all this kind of stuff, even when it's not false information. So I'm going to link you to a video that goes more in depth to the censorship and most of it happening with big tech, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, etc., right? Most of it happening with them. I'm going to link you down to a really good video, a conversation between Tim Pool and Twitter and Joe Rogan, and they talk about this and they look them directly in the eye and say it. And Twitter hasn't changed anything, but this was a really good conversation for you to sort of get a decent education on how this is happening and what they're doing and what they're thinking, and it's just terrible. So the second thing about fascism is violence. Okay, every fascist government eventually used the violence to suppress the opposition, right? Which is, of course, forcible suppression, right? Look no further than 2020 with the Black Lives Matter riots and Antifa. And I'm going to show you a quick thing of how the Democratic Party, all of those riots, all of the protesting, all of the murders, the arson, property damage, over $2 billion of property damage, hundreds of officers injured, dozens of people murdered, thousands of people injured, marred, scarred. All of this was on the left. And in 2020, not one Democrat, including people I know, if you're watching this and you know this, none of you condemned it. All of you supported it, gave it credence, credibility, talking about systemic racism, talking about all these kinds of things. And so I'm going to show you a quick video of the Democratic leaders also condoning it, supporting it, and actually, in many ways, inciting the violence that happened in 2020.
In some cities, such as Portland, the violence has raged for 3 months. During this period, the bulk of the media has either ignored the mayhem or worse, attempted to whitewash lawless thuggery like throwing fireworks, rocks and bottles at officers protecting a courthouse as some form of social justice activism.
There were many protests over the weekend, and it seems as if the momentum and drive for police reform and social justice is growing and continuing. And they were mostly peaceful, almost 100% peaceful.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
That ain't a riot, what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis. What we're seeing right there is frustration and anger and rage and an uprising.
The Chicago Sun-Times front page talking about peaceful and powerful.
So what does he have to do? He has to sic police on peaceful protesters.
I don't care that much about statues.
Respectfully, shouldn't that be done by a commission or the city council, not a mob in the middle of the night throwing it into the harbor?
People will do what they do.
So do not get it twisted and think that, oh, this is something that has never happened before, and then this is so terrible, and where are we, and these savages and all of that.
Cost $1 to $2 billion in claims.
For most of yesterday, people came and they were peaceful as they expressed their grief, as they expressed their anger and demanded greater justice.
And they're pinning it all on what's been an overwhelmingly peaceful movement for racial solidarity.
Hey! No! No!
Now, a lot of the left today like to talk about Martin Luther King Jr., right? And they say, we're upholding the legacy of civil rights. This is actually not what you're doing. Martin Luther King Jr. is rolling over in his grave primarily because he was absolutely for nonviolent protesting. However, the left today, they are not for nonviolent protesting. They call it mostly peaceful and things like that, but then there's buildings burning at the back, and they're destroying businesses owned by black owners, which is a kind of a weird thing, right? You're saying Black Lives Matter, but then you just ruin the livelihood of a black life. And if you look at the Capitol insurrection done by the right, done by the classical liberals, or what we would call conservatives today in America, they all condemned it when that Capitol insurrection happened. Right? When they kind of went up to the Capitol and they broke, like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 windows. And then I think a few people died, which is tragic. But comparing that to what the left was doing is not even a comparable thing. And the main difference is not so much how many people died or how much stuff was destroyed. The main difference is that conservatives condemned it while the Democrats acknowledged and supported it. So how do we get to this point, right? How does a fascist government get to the point where they're condoning and justifying violence? Today in America's left, the way that they're doing it is the way that they did it in the 20th century. It's through Marxism. It's through group identity, okay? So what is group identity? Very simply, I have a video about this, but very simply, Marxism is pretty much group identity. Is pretty much all I'm saying is that whatever group that I put you in, this identity that I give into the group is your primary identifier. And your individual identity is simply secondary or tertiary to your primary. Does that make sense? So let me give you how America does it today. Okay, if you're a police officer and you're white, you are probably racist. You're just a racist person. If you voted for Trump, you are probably a racist and a bigot and a tyrant and a homophobe and a transphobe and all these words, right? What does group identity allow me to do? If I have a whole group, hundreds of millions of people, and I say, you guys are all racist, right? Then what does that mean? That means I can apply group guilt, right? I can say you're guilty of racism, okay? It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done. I don't care. You're individual, whatever. You are in this group. You're white and you're a cop. You are a racist. So now they are guilty. All white cops are guilty of racism. So you see all these incidents happening between white cops and black people, most of the time males, but sometimes females. And immediately every Democrat, every leftist is going to say, oh yeah, that was the cop's fault. Does that make sense? This is not how the Christian should think, but this is how a lot of the Democrats think today. And this is where you are flirting with the danger of Marxism and the danger of group identity and the danger of becoming a racist just in a different way. You're keeping the categories the same, but then you're just putting different people in those categories, right? But in essence, you're just the most racist person I know. And all the racist people in today's America, honestly, the majority of them are all Democrats. They're all on the left, and the radical left has infiltrated the mainstream left. So another thing that every fascist government had is that they were a very powerful centralized government, right? In other words, fascist governments are extremely, extremely powerful, okay? They have all the money, they have really high taxes, which pretty much means they have all the money, right? They're taking money from the citizens, okay? They have really high taxes. They generally will take away the guns of the citizens, right? So there's a lot of power going into a couple people on top of this huge triangle. Does that make sense? And that's what the socialists want. And I made a video about socialism, and you can watch it if you want to, okay? And that's in essence what they're wanting to do, okay? They're wanting the government to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The government needs to regulate speech. The government needs to regulate healthcare. The government needs to regulate education and what's being taught to the kids. The government needs to regulate taxes and increase the taxes, tax the rich and give to the poor. And so they want all the money and the power to go into the hands of very few people, because those few people have deceived all the Democrats into thinking we're good people. Give us your money and we will disperse it evenly and everybody will have the same amount, right? Now, if you ask anyone who has common sense, they're going to kind of laugh at that and go, what are you talking about? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But that's actually what they're selling. Benito Mussolini, he has a very famous quote, and he says, everything in the state, nothing outside the state. Does that make sense? So Mussolini, who's in many ways the father of fascism, at least the face of fascism, he created an idea where it's like everything is in the state or in the government, right? The central government, everything's in here, and there's nothing outside of it. So every healthcare, education, policing, military, whatever, everything, right? All of it is in the state. There's nothing outside of it, right? So there's no such thing as a free market. The government will control everything. The Nazis had a very similar thing as well, and you can Google all this. If you think I'm lying to you, you can Google all of it. I hope you go do it. I hope you actually learn and educate yourself if this is new to you. The Nazi 20-point platform was exactly that. There was state control of banks, healthcare, education, churches, all this kind of stuff. All these things that every Democrat said Donald Trump was, he was not. Donald Trump he actually did the opposite. He was making the government smaller. He was relegating the government, right? But the left wants to put the government high and say, we are strong, we can control it, we can do everything, guys, trust in us, put your faith in us, give us your vote, give us your money. And this is what the Democrats are proposing to the American today. And a decent amount of Americans have fallen for this deception. So remember, fascism, right, takes the opposing party, whoever disagrees with them, okay, and wants to restrict their speech, wants to use violence as a means of getting their way, okay, gives the opposition a stigma or calling them evil. All the group is evil, right? All the group is wicked. You're all oppressors or victimizers, right? You're oppressing the victims, right? And then they want a very big central government in which they have power. They want to stack the courts, for instance, right? They want all the money flowing into them and they want to regulate what the free market is doing. This is fascism. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. Love you guys so much. Thank you for watching. I hope that you can share this video. I hope this helped you. I hope it educated you. I hope that, you can leave a comment down below. Ask me whatever questions that you want to. God bless you guys, and I will see you next time.